In late January, the Ottawa Citizen ran a story that as of April 1st, 2024, rents will be going up for Canadian military personnel living in accommodations provided by National Defence. This was not something that the Department of National Defence deliberately made public, but rather it was disgruntled soldiers who leaked the news of the rent hike to Ottawa Citizen reporter David Pugliese. It's time to target the sad state of military housing across Canada. When asked to confirm the news of the rent hike, the D&D officials had no option but to admit the truth, albeit with an attempt to put a positive spin on it. We are committed to offering affordable, safe, and quality housing to Canadian Armed Forces personnel and their families, stated D&D spokesperson André-Anne Poulin in an email to Pugliese. In fact, rental rates for D&D residential housing are lower than current market average rents. So that's it. Nothing to see here. Indeed, a 4.2% rent hike for military accommodation might not be national news were it not for a number of mitigating circumstances. Namely, the CAF are in the midst of a recruiting and retention crisis that has resulted in a crippling shortfall in personnel. In the RCN, international ship deployments have been curtailed. The RCAF have forfeit exercises with NATO allies, and the Army is hard-pressed to force generate for the forward deployed battle group in Latvia, let alone train new recruits. One would think that every effort would be made to retain experienced members of the CAF at this critical juncture, and that would not include jacking up the rent on their housing. Surely the brain trust at National Defence Headquarters would be aware of an internal military report from June 2023, wherein it was acknowledged that Canadian Forces personnel were increasingly leaving the ranks rather than moving to a new military base where they couldn't afford housing.
I am concerned. There's just not enough Canadian Forces to be able to do everything.
Brigadier General Virginia Tattersall commented in a briefing note that in some locations, the average cost to purchase or rent housing now exceeds incomes of several CAF working rank levels. Just before Christmas 2023, the Chronicle Herald ran a series of stories about CAF members in Halifax either living in tents or couch surfing due to the lack of available affordable housing in that city.
Today we'll hear from presenters regarding the impact on veterans and military families amidst a cost of living crisis.
The matter was addressed to members of Nova Scotia's Legislative Assembly by Erica Fleck, Director of Emergency Management for the Municipality of Halifax. Fleck, herself a veteran of the CAF, told MLAs that she has identified an increase in the number of active duty members who are unhoused or who have only precarious housing.
We have active serving regular force members who are still couch surfing that were posted here in the summer. They cannot find a place to live. They're regularly now going to food banks.
Her comments were echoed by Craig Hood, Executive Director of the Royal Canadian Legion Nova Scotia Nunavut Command.
I did a deep dive on this topic, and what I came across was some startling information of serving members of Canadian Armed Forces being posted here, living rough in tents, living out of their vehicles, couch surfing, engaging in interpersonal relationships for the purposes of securing housing, which often at times puts them as victims to domestic violence.
Hood went so far as to call the military housing crisis in Halifax an epidemic. So the answer from leadership in Ottawa was to jack up the rents in the limited housing available through the Canadian Forces Housing Agency, or the CFHA. As spokesperson Poulin noted to Pugliese, the rents for National Defence housing units are generally below the local market value. However, there is a perpetual shortage of these units, and it is usually those who can least afford to pay the higher civilian rents that find themselves on a lengthy wait list for a military housing unit. This should not be a head-scratcher dilemma for the senior military brass. Having homeless veterans across Canada is a tragedy. Having homeless serving members is a national disgrace. One can imagine the impact on the morale of experienced personnel couch surfing and living rough. And who in their right mind would enlist into an organization that cannot properly house its soldiers? Canadians might debate spending $19 billion on future fighter aircraft or spending $100 billion for 15 future frigates for the Royal Canadian Navy, but I cannot imagine anyone arguing against the building of modern, comfortable accommodations for the men and women who serve in uniform. This has been On Target. I'm Scott Taylor.